As this hearing is fully virtual, I now call it to order. Let me first begin by addressing a few housekeeping matters. For today's meeting, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they're not under recognition for purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice that you've not unmuted yourself, I'll ask if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there's a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You will notice a clock on your screen that will show how much time is remaining. At 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that their time is almost expired. When your time is expired, the clock will turn red and I will begin to recognize the next member. In terms of the speaking order, we will follow the order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member, then alternating between majority and minority. Members present at the time the hearing is called to order will be recognized in order of seniority between majority and minority. Members not present at the time of the hearing will be recognized according to their appearance. Finally, the House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been previously provided to your staff. Last reminder, please ensure that your video is turned on at this time. Well, let me just say good morning and welcome to today's hearing on USDA's Domestic Nutrition Assistance Programs. Testifying before the committee today is Stacy Dean, the Deputy Undersecretary of Food, Nutrition, and Consumer Services. Ms. Dean, although you've only been on the job since January 21st, you have a profound understanding of USDA's domestic nutrition programs stemming from your work at the Office of Management and Budget and later at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Your work directing CPPP's Food Assistance Team, which publishes frequent reports on which we in Congress rely very heavily, telling us how federal nutrition programs affect families, and you're having worked to develop policies to improve the delivery of health and human services programs at the state and local level has not gone unnoticed. You've certainly hit the ground running, and I thank you for being here to discuss the latest developments and opportunities and challenges ahead. FNS is responsible for overseeing 15 domestic nutrition assistance programs that comprise the nation's nutrition safety net. Each year, millions of our most vulnerable populations rely on these programs to feed their children, put a good, healthy meal on the table. The past year, with millions out of work, school, we saw just how vital these programs are. COVID-19 and the resulting economic fallout disrupted life for everyone. And for tens of millions of people, it greatly exacerbated hunger and food insecurity. In many cases, programs such as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, or the Emergency Food Assistance Program, TFAP, were the difference between having food or missing a meal. For some, it was their first time needing assistance. To me, it underscores the absolute necessity of continuing to invest and improve these programs. It's worth taking a moment to look at SNAP and TFAP to understand the magnitude of the crisis. Before the pandemic hit, there were around 38 million monthly SNAP participants. In September 2020, there were nearly 43 million SNAP participants. And to date, pandemic, EBT has helped 16.8 million children. For fiscal year 21, we provided an additional $80 million for the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, a program that supplements the diets of low-income seniors. And through several COVID-19 supplements, Congress has appropriated more than $1.2 billion for TFAP. I'm sure we all remember seeing pictures and news reports of people waiting in miles-long food lines for food banks. These images are jarring, and it's essential to remember that behind these pictures are real families that are trying to figure out just how they're going to make it through today, tomorrow, and the week ahead. To its credit, FNS has issued more than 4,000 program waivers and flexibilities to adjust to local needs and maximize access for all eligible families. This includes the nationwide extension of several waivers that allow all children to continue to receive nutritious meals this summer when schools are out of session through September 30th, 2021. I was also glad to see that USDA recently increased emergency SNAP benefits for 25 million people. In my home state of Georgia, that means an additional $38.8 million in monthly benefits, which will make a measurable difference in people's lives. I'm also looking forward to hearing your thoughts on WIC, Pandemic EBT, the SNAP online purchasing program, and nutrition assistance in the territories. Also, the Farmers to Families Food Box program. I'd like to hear your explanation of the Secretary's decision to end it, as well as your thoughts on the food purchase and distribution program that has assisted American farmers and ranchers who were negatively impacted by trade policies. As you can tell, there's a lot to discuss today, and I again want to thank you, Deputy Undersecretary Dean, for being with us, and I look forward to our discussion. Now let me ask my distinguished ranking member, my partner in this endeavor, Mr. Fortenberry, if he will give any opening remarks that he cares to give. And for that purpose, I will recognize you, Mr. Fortenberry, at this time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, not only for your friendship, but your important leadership, particularly in topics like this. This is the largest, by far, part of the USDA budget, and we cannot overlook this as we're dealing with all the structural issues facing our country. And, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy you invoked the image of food banks as you were giving your opening remarks. One of the more jarring images for me during the height of the pandemic, actually in earlier stages when it was beginning to surge, was the visit I paid to one of my local food banks. They had actually moved it outside, and there were a line of cars a quarter-mile long. Some of the people that were there, I was told they used to serve food. Now they're asking for our help. And so I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, us working vigorously last year with the department to basically establish the programs in which we provided the supplemental food boxes, as well as other initiatives so that we weren't wasting food at that time. Mr. Dean, good morning. Congratulations on your new position. I'll move right into several key topics that I would like you to address. This hearing today, it really evokes a paradox because it's one that faces our wealthy nation. Our extraordinary natural resources, our ingenuity, our technological prowess, all of these things have allowed us to provide among the most abundant, low-cost, nutritious, and extraordinarily diverse array of foods in the entire world. The average American spends less than 10% of their income on food. Our farmers are so productive that we can even afford to export billions of dollars in food aid every year. All good things. And yet, we also know that some Americans still face hunger. The core question is, how is that possible? Second, I think we should examine the metrics for success at USDA's 15 or more nutritional programs. USDA manages feeding programs for every stage of life, from prenatal children to senior citizens. We spend over $120 billion in the SNAP program. But as I said to Ag Secretary Vilsack last week, food is nutrition. Food is also health. Food is also medicine. The question then becomes, we feed people, but do we feed people well, especially when we experience a 1,000-fold increase in childhood diabetes, for instance? What's wrong? We've spent and spent. Hunger has been reduced, thankfully, but at the expense of health. Finally, let's look at a subset of our programs that, from my perspective, I believe is a part of a transformational way of thinking to meet the multiple objectives of both food and nutrition, support for farmers and local economies, and inspiration for the next generation of agricultural producers. It's called the Farm to School program. I'm proud to have regularly advanced this initiative in Congress and helped to refine it as we continue to promote it. Last year, I visited one of my local elementary schools, actually it was before the pandemic, and participated in what's called a crunch off. So the people who are managing this program, filtering it all the way down to the elementary school level, are very dedicated and enthusiastic to introduce the children to healthy, fresh, locally grown foods. The crunch off is, in this case, was taking apples from the local region and biting into them on a countdown. One little child held up the apple and said, "Is this apple real?" So it shows how we've got a huge opportunity to continue to educate kids, grow local economies, connect the farmer to the family through our school system. And this is an important program. More than 23 million students at 47,000 of America's schools have participated in the Farm to School program. So it is an important priority. And again, I think one of those small programs that has the potential to be scaled to grow the outcomes that we need to see of completely holistically integrating both food as nutrition and even possibly food as medicine. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dean, I look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. It's my understanding that our chair, Mr. Laura Noah, our ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Granger, neither is going to be in attendance. They've got some other responsibilities with some other subcommittees this morning. So at this point, I think it's appropriate for us to introduce and to call on our witness, Ms. Dean, and I would appreciate very much if you would go forward with your testimony. And I now yield the floor to you, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Chairman Bishop and Ranking Member Fortenberry. I'm Stacy Dean, Deputy Undersecretary for Food, Nutrition, and Consumer Services at USDA, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today about FNS's COVID response. The COVID-19 public health and economic crisis has caused unprecedented hardship, as the chairman noted, making it difficult for many to afford food and keep a roof over their head. Today, an estimated 25 million adults and 6 to 10 million children are struggling to get enough to eat, with communities of color hit particularly hard. The Biden administration has taken a whole of government approach to addressing such hardship. Upon taking office, President Biden directed every federal agency to help Americans in the pandemic's grip. Congress had already enhanced FNS's ability to adapt our programs in response to the pandemic, and we were grateful for that. But more needed to be done. So let me share 3 examples of our administrative efforts. First, as you noted, we strengthened pandemic EBT to help low-income families make up for missed meals when schools are closed, increasing benefits by about $1 a day per child. And our new guidance simplified PEBT implementation. Today, 35 states and territories have approved PEBT plans to serve more than 20 million children. We're working hard to help other states and territories launch their own programs. We addressed a major gap in SNAP emergency allotment policy that resulted in little or no help to some 25 million program participants who were the least able to absorb COVID's economic shocks. Starting this month, all SNAP households will receive at least an extra $95 a month in help. And this morning, we announced needed flexibilities for child nutrition programs for the next school year so that we can ensure that we're supporting a strong school reopening and feeding kids safely with healthy, nutritious meals. In addition to these administrative actions, President Biden proposed and Congress just passed the American Rescue Plan, providing significant new nutrition assistance. Just 5 weeks after enactment, the Rescue Plan is already helping families. In shelters that participate in the Child and Adult Care Food Program, USDA now reimburses meals to homeless youth between the ages of 18 and 24. States are increasing WIC's cash value vouchers, more than tripling fruit and vegetable buying power for women and children. And states will receive over $1 billion in administrative funds to help them meet increased demand for SNAP and to increase efficiency and access in the program. Territories are building their plans to utilize the additional $1 billion Congress provided to help them serve hard-hit families. Now, looking ahead, the rescue plan will also extend pandemic EBT through the summer and the duration of the public health emergency, and it extended the 15% boost in SNAP benefits that was slated to end in June through September, and that's about $100 a month for a family of 4. This helps families purchase the food that they need, and it also supports farmers and producers who receive 15 cents out of every SNAP dollar. So USDA, and here I really want to highlight the amazing staff, my team at FNS have worked tirelessly to respond to the nutrition crisis. But we know that doing the work, just doing the work isn't evidence of a successful response. That's why we're building assessment into all of our implementation efforts. We want to integrate lessons learned going forward, including the need to communicate early and often, offer broad flexibilities instead of individual and thousands of waivers, and address the way emergencies exacerbate long-standing inequities in service delivery and access. Early signs suggest that our efforts are working. The latest census data suggests a drop in food hardship. It's a hopeful indicator that we'll monitor closely. And while our focus has been the immediate COVID response, we're also looking ahead. As the president says, we must act boldly now to build a better tomorrow. And here are just 3 quick examples of our plans. First, we're working to ensure SNAP benefits can support healthy eating. For years, experts have argued that SNAP benefits do not reflect the realistic cost of a basic healthy diet, undermining participants' ability to buy and prepare healthy food. As the Farm Bill directed us, we're reevaluating the Thrifty Food Plan to ensure it meets that standard. Second, we'll work to improve maternal and child health outcomes across racial and ethnic lines, an administration priority through WIC. WIC is a proven intervention, and yet the share of eligible families receiving its benefits have declined over the past decade to only just more than half. We're going to invest rescue plan resources in better connecting WIC to healthcare, program improvements, robust outreach, and innovation and service delivery, all with the goal of improving equity and reducing health disparities. And third, we'll prioritize nutrition security in each program. And I know the Secretary spoke to you about that. That includes incorporating the latest dietary guidelines where appropriate and strengthening nutrition education efforts. I am very eager to work with the subcommittee as we strengthen the programs to respond to COVID and for the future. Thank you, and I very much look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dean. We will now proceed with questions. As I mentioned earlier, we will begin with the chair and ranking member, then alternating majority and minority with members present at the time the hearing starts in order of seniority. After that, I will recognize members who were not present at the time the hearing is called to order. And I will do my best to accommodate Ms. Lee's request in the earlier parts of the round, following the chair and the ranking member. Ms. Dean, as I mentioned, you've had to hit the ground running. Recent announcement by USDA, such as providing an additional $1 billion per month in SNAP benefits to an estimated 25 million people, and officially ending the previous administration's attempt to restrict the ability of states to provide SNAP to able-bodied adults without dependents, will have an immeasurable impact on people's lives. The last year, we've been reacting to the current crisis, but looking long term, what kind of changes do you think we need to make to ensure people have enough nutritious food, especially during emergencies? Tell us if USDA is working on a legislative proposal for the FY22 budget, for the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Bill, for the next Farm Bill, or all of the above. And if you would do that quickly, I'd like to get to a second question having to do with nutrition assistance for the territories. Puerto Rico, American Samoa, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands are not part of the regular SNAP program, and they're dependent on Congress in the event of an emergency. 2017, Hurricane Maria, Congress made available $1.9 billion for Puerto Rico. We responded to the typhoon in the Mariana Islands in 2018 and provided relief for the territories and a number of other bills. Can you discuss the path forward as you see it to transitioning these territories to SNAP? I raise these questions with reference to my memories of Congressman Jose Serrano. So tell us what the territories need to do and what we need to do to help them.
Okay, let me take those in order. So first, we very much look forward to working with Congress on what you talked about in terms of are there lessons learned, and in particular, what can we do to help the programs flex in an emergency moving forward? So I would say, do you think the thrifty adjustment is going to be one of the most important things that we do to make sure that the program offers a benefit that will be sufficient for a basic healthy diet? But as we look ahead to opportunities like child nutrition reauthorization, I would say a great example of what we could be doing there is building an emergency disaster authority into child nutrition and WIC so that we're not dependent upon Congress offering us the kinds of wonderful flexibilities that you did through Families First and CARES, but that we've got it ready to go. So that would just be two quick examples, Mr. Chairman. With respect to the territories, first, let me, I hope, reiterate what you already know, which is President Biden is fully committed to the territories having access to the federal nutrition programs consistent with states. So that will take an act of Congress, but we are already leaning in on that. My regional leads and I have met with, the regional leads have met with the leadership teams at CNMI, the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, Puerto Rico, and American Samoa, to talk to them about what their interest is and how we can work together in building a plan on what transitioning from their block grants to SNAP would mean. And second, I've met with Congresswoman Gonzalez-Colon already, as well as Congressman Sablan, about their interest on this. We take this very seriously, and we look forward to working with you and the authorizers on a plan.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Dean, can you share your thoughts about the need to consider racial justice in our domestic food program? Secretary Vilsack has cast the efforts to improve America's access to nutritious food as a part of the racial justice effort. Can you discuss that, please?
Yes. Well, this sort of intersects with all aspects of what we do. As I talk to my team, I think we want to understand how and why people are coming to need food assistance, and longstanding racial inequality and systemic racism, particularly, for example, in the labor market, are a part of what bring people to needing our food assistance. And knowing and appreciating that, I think, is very important as we look to meet people's needs. We want to know why they're coming to us and how and what cause. And then second, what are the food programs doing to push against those disparities? And certainly at a minimum, we don't want to make anything worse. You mentioned the 3-month time limit in SNAP and our efforts to soften the prior administration's efforts to make that worse. I think that's an example of a policy that probably really exacerbates racial inequality, just because the labor market is not an equal opportunity place, and asking individuals to work part to full time just won't play out the same across racial and ethnic lines. And of course, then there's the issue of healthy and nutritious food. And we see in our school meals program that we've been able to increase the quality of what children eat, and that cuts across racial and ethnic lines, which is so important because the way that health disparities play out.
Thank you,
sorry.
Ms. Dean. My time has
Oh.
expired. I will be happy to come back to you. But at this time, I would like to yield to our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Fortenberry, for questions. You're now recognized, Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dean, if you were to grade the federal government's performance in educating and influencing the America's public on eating well, on eating choices, what grade would you give?
I'd say the American public's grade isn't a good one in the sense of we know Americans aren't eating with respect to the healthy eating index. Sorry, I think we can do more. I'm not sure how to grade us, but I know we're not at an A, and we have a lot to do to get there.
Well, I could give you the litany of statistics, one of which I cited in my opening remarks about a 1,000-fold increase in childhood diabetes. And then, of course, we have increasing obesity rates, and then the correlation of that problem to health outcomes. So it lands squarely on the plate, if you will, as a beginning component of how we not only feed people, but we feed people well, both in terms of public programs, but also the projection of nutrition, education, and information. So how are we going to fix that?
Well, Mr. Fortenberry, you couldn't have a more passionate chairman on this issue than the secretary, and I hope he conveyed that very clearly last week. Some of the things we'll be doing is making sure that we update all of the nutrition standards in our programs to reflect the most recent set of dietary guidelines. Those revisions offer us an opportunity to take a look at how we're doing with respect to promoting and supporting healthy, nutritious food. I also think the adjustment to SNAP's Thrifty Food Plan will put healthy food in reach for many very, very poor families for whom it just may not have been an option for them.
Well, look, you use the term nutritional security. I like that term. We talk in terms of food security, and let's be frank, we've done a very good job of increasing caloric intake and substantially reducing, let's call it systemic hunger across this country. But the issue, that isn't fully the issue as we are seeing. Food is health, and to make those two things inextricably intertwined has to be the objective if we are providing a holistic public policy for well-being. Let me turn then to the Farm to School program quickly. How can we scale that program? I assume you like it. I do. I think it's an important program, again, meeting multiple objections on educating kids about nutrition, but also generating local economies for our farmers.
Well, we love the Farm to School program. I loved your story of Crunch Off. I just have to flag that. So look, part of the issue is the resources that we have for the grants. So that will be something that we'll have to work with Congress on. I think we have a number of ideas about, and I appreciated the bill you had on potentially looking at the scale of the grants so that we can bring in more larger scale efforts. And I think we also want to take a look at some of the core learning of Farm to School. And I want to make sure we're talking with our partners at AMS and rural development about how we make sure that we're working across our different lanes at USDA to bring local producers and connect them with the schools and our purchasing power. So I hope we build bigger.
Okay. Well, obviously we have a decided emphasis on this program because of all the reasons that I said, and I think it's exciting. And the other question though, is there a nexus with the extension service? You know, a long time ago, extension being fully integrated or particularly in rural areas, substantially integrated into public school systems with basic classes on nutrition and other dynamics. Like that is less common now. Is there a nexus between Farm to School and extension?
Well, I think you make an excellent point there. Actually, we were planning to bring folks together from across USDA to talk about how to build out farm to school. So I'll make sure extension is there. I appreciate that suggestion.
I think this is very important because, again, the tradition of this was already in place. And for whatever reason, that began to drift because of social dynamics in the country. But I do think they have the foundational expertise to perhaps be a substantive participant in that internal discussion. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Dean.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. At this time, I'm happy to recognize Ms. Lee, the chair of our Foreign Ops Subcommittee, for your questions. Ms. Lee, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and Mr. Fortenberry, for giving me a chance to go early since I have another subcommittee that I'm participating in. I really appreciate your help. And thank you for your leadership. And thank you, Ms. Dean, for being here with us. A couple of questions I just wanted to ask very quickly. Now, in your testimony, of course, you referenced the disastrous conditions and consequences, of the COVID-19 epidemic. And I really applaud your administration, our administration, for continuing to suspend the 3-month time limit on SNAP benefits for unemployed adults without dependents. Now, given what we know about just hunger in America in general, given what we know about the fact that so many more people are unemployed, and the longer that you're unemployed, the more difficult it is for you to reenter the workforce. I'm wondering, and given the racial impact, disparate impact on communities and people of color, want to make sure, how do we permanently rescind the time limit with regard to the equity in our food assistance programs, and really make it permanent, because these time limits just aren't going to work. We had a hunger problem in America before COVID. We have a hunger problem now. And so we don't need to go back to where we were by imposing time limits on SNAP benefits.
Thank you, Congresswoman Lee. I completely agree. This is an incredibly harsh rule that punishes individuals for not being able to work 20 hours a week consistently. In a labor market, certainly today, but very often, that just doesn't offer that opportunity for very low-skilled and very poor individuals. This includes homeless individuals, veterans. It is a rule that really expects, I think, what is not feasible for many. So the rule, however, is in the law. So changing it would require an act of Congress, and something that perhaps could be taken up in the next Farm Bill.
And we're working on that as we speak in terms of legislation. But I guess until we can get, you know how this goes, it could take months, years, who knows? And so many people are just barely hanging on now. And we all know the food banks, the food lines, people who have been middle income in the past find themselves in food banks and begging their government just to help feed them. And so we've got to figure out how we can sustain this and keep more people from going hungry through this period. Now, does that require just executive order after executive order after executive order to hold on till we get it passed in legislation? It's an emergency. And so I'm trying to figure out what the administration can do until we get the legislation passed.
Yeah, sorry. Congress actually wisely suspended the time limit for the duration of the public health emergency. So for at least some time, we'll have the time limit will not be in effect. After that, states will have to seek waivers for areas of high unemployment within their state, and we will work we will be a very what's the right word to say, good partner with states in making sure that they can apply that where possible. And I'm happy to report back to your staff on some of the specific details if that's helpful.
That would be helpful because, okay, so what you're saying now is states can request a waiver, and then you would
for areas of high, excuse me, I'm sorry, Congresswoman, for areas of high unemployment. It goes back to the old rules that were in place prior to the Trump administration's proposal to change them. I'm happy to go through the details with your team, but I think the time limit very likely just under the law will be coming back at some point in the near future, very unfortunately.
Yeah, and see, one of the issues, there may be areas of low unemployment, but with people of color, you have high unemployment. Like you may have low unemployment at 4%, yet you'll have African Americans, Latinx, AAPI individuals, indigenous people with 10%, 15% unemployment. So some states may not be able to meet that threshold, yet you'll have groups of people who are hungry still and can't deal with these, and the time limits would prevent them from accessing the benefits.
Absolutely. That is exactly the challenge that we face.
Okay, well, I'd like to work with you on that because we can't come to the end of this and have so many more people of color falling into the, not even into the ranks of the poor, but into the ranks of those who are hungry, because it's been a heck of a struggle even before the pandemic.
I welcome that.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Ms. Lee.
Chairman.
You are now free to pursue your other responsibilities. And at this time, I'm delighted to recognize the gentleman from Alabama, the former chair of this subcommittee, Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Adderholt, you are now recognized for your questions.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be with the subcommittee today. I welcome Ms. Dean and being here with us today virtually. And I want to ask about the American Rescue Plan Act funds. And I understand that it provided improvements to the SNAP online purchasing. Electronic benefit modernization was included, as well as mobile payment technologies, as well as technical assistance for retailers and farmers markets to adopt new technologies. This subcommittee has, over the years, has recognized the challenging of rural communities that face insecure broadband connectivity. Can you talk a little bit about how the needs of rural SNAP participants could be prioritized?
Well, I think they're the perfect example of a group that we want to make sure who could very greatly benefit from the ability to do online shopping. And so those individuals, as well as smaller retailers, are both the participants and the type of enterprises that we're trying to put front and center and prioritize through our grant making to make sure that we are making this a more viable option. For as many people as possible, particularly those, as you mentioned, who may not have access to a store nearby, and where online shopping would make a big difference.
Yeah, but the one thing that we're seeing is the broadband connectivity issue, and that's something that I think we can't forget about, because there's many places that rural in the nation that still does not have that connectivity, and even though they have the new technologies are available, they're not able to use them. So,
well, Congressman, you make a good point, and as we work on how to deploy these funds, we should be talking to our colleagues at Rural Development to look at how USDA is rolling out more rural broadband to make sure that we're making sure that the participants have the tools that they need. So I'll take that back.
Yeah, thanks. And I'd love to work with you on that, because that's been an issue that I've worked on, and many on this subcommittee have worked on over the years. Let me ask about the SNAP quality control system. During the pandemic, there was, of course, understandably, an increased participation in the nutrition assistance programs that was administered by your area, the FNS. How has the increased volume and the changes to the program impacted the SNAP quality control review?
So thank you very much for that question. And of course, program integrity is a top priority for us. Congress actually suspended quality control reviews in some of the prior legislation. basically deciding to prioritize access and meeting this emergency in terms of the tremendous food need. Quality, we still encourage states to continue to do the reviews. It's just that our official federal measurement system is taking a pause. That comes back online later this summer. As I said, we have been encouraging states to continue to do reviews for themselves. We're still working with them on ensuring that programs are spent accurately, but it will be, we probably will not have an official federal error rate for the pandemic period.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Aderholt. And I might just take note of the fact that as we are meeting and as we speak, the authorizing committee is holding a hearing with rural development on rural broadband. And of course, it is a very, very important issue. And I think it goes to the issues that you raised, Mr. Aderholt. So if it's any consolation, the authorizing committee is holding hearings right now on that very subject.
Very good.
At this time, I am delighted to recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Lauren Underwood. Ms. Underwood, you are now recognized for your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Ms. Dean for joining us today. So in last week's hearing with Secretary Vilsack, I asked him some questions about the department's plans to improve the WIC program. And I'm really glad to have this opportunity with you today to get some more information on the food and nutrition services efforts in this space. Ms. Dean, in your written testimony, you say connecting more eligible women and children to WIC services is one of the most powerful interventions available to reduce racial disparities in maternal and child health outcomes. I'm pleased to see that participation among eligible Black and Latinx families is higher than average, and that the agency is accelerating outreach to increase WIC enrollment. But the Black maternal mortality crisis is worsening, and we must do more. The President's fiscal year 22 discretionary funding request includes an overall increase of more than $1 billion for critical nutrition programs, including WIC. Specifically, Ms. Dean, how will your agency use this increase in WIC funding to address the maternal mortality crisis for Black mothers and other women and birthing people of color?
Thank you, Congresswoman Underwood. I think first we're going to start with the new resources that were provided by Congress through the American Rescue Plan. We're calling it our WIC Outreach, Innovation, and Modernization Fund. We want to actually your bill as some of our inspiration on the kinds of the areas where we want to be making investments. So absolutely a national outreach plan. We want to be providing grant making to better connect WIC to the local healthcare and maternal and child care healthcare system so that there is information sharing and cross referrals there. We want to make sure that WIC is WIC could use in some cases some streamlining and modernization on the services that it's providing so that it remains inviting an inviting service for moms and children. So we start there. Those funds aren't all we want to do, though. Those funds are a tool for us to shift our approach on strengthening the program. So let me stop there. I think the budget request is a little difficult for me to get into, but the bottom line goal is we are seeking full funding for WIC, and we're going to do everything we can to bring more eligible mothers, infants, and children to this program because we know it works in improving their basic nutrition and health.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful to hear. My Black Maternal Health Momnibus Act would extend the WIC eligibility period for postpartum and breastfeeding individuals to 24 months. According to the National WIC Association, extending eligibility to provide ongoing nutrition support for postpartum mothers is a critical step to setting up future pregnancy success, ensuring mothers continue to receive nutritious food and tailored counseling to mitigate or prevent chronic diet-related conditions like diabetes and obesity. Ms. Dean, can you speak to how extending WIC's postpartum and breastfeeding eligibility periods could expand the program's positive impacts on the health of mothers and babies?
Well, I think, Congresswoman, you just did that for me. The idea of keeping them connected to WIC's terrific services would mean that they are have more ongoing connection to health, nutrition counseling, and of course the broad set of referral services. I do think I think I'm very interested in this, and I want us to take a close look at it. But it is also very important in WIC because Congress and administrations cross party lines for decades have made a strong commitment to full funding in WIC. We want to make sure that the costs of this can be borne out permanently. And that the appropriators would be fully committed to that. So I look forward to learning more from you and talking more with you and your staff about this idea.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. In the 20 to 2025 Dietary Guidelines for Americans, released in late 2020, it contains key evidence-based recommendations for healthy diets, including new recommendations for pregnant and lactating women, infants, and young children. What kind of funding and support would be required for USDA to implement a successful consumer education campaign to ensure that the public has culturally relevant and accessible tools to support healthy eating?
I'm thrilled to hear your interest in that, and I think you'll find the details on our budget request will give you the information that you need there on how FNS could do more with for a public effort. So I look forward to more conversation.
Well, thanks so much for your testimony today, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. I believe Mr. Harris has stepped away. Dr. Harris has stepped away. So at this time, I'm delighted to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Valadeo. Mr. Valadeo, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Ms. Dean, Deputy Undersecretary, for your time today. Ms. Dean, throughout your testimony, you referenced the issue of food insecurity. I'm glad you bring this up because it is a very important subject. Just last week, USDA Secretary Vilsack testified in front of this subcommittee and discussed the importance of the food insecurity issue. The morning of the Secretary's hearing, we read in the news about the USDA's abrupt decision to cancel the Farmers to Families Food Box program. This action seems to directly contradict your testimony that highlights the need to address food insecurity. Yesterday, my colleagues and I sent a letter to Secretary Vilsack expressing concern for the USDA's elimination of the program without replacing it with any real alternative to feed communities in need. Elimination will create further unrest in these communities who have already been negatively impacted by COVID-19 pandemic. We also urge the Secretary to reverse this decision and continue the food box program. At the very least, before ending the program, USDA should review the program in its most recent form, utilize nearly $1 billion left in authorized but unspent funds for the program, and employ other authorities to continue the program before canceling it without substantive alternatives. On this subject, just a few weeks ago, USDA hosted an all-day listening session on the food box program and received input from numerous stakeholders, many of them even in my district. Did you have any knowledge before the listening session that USDA was planning to cancel the program? And if so, why would you hold such a lengthy event just to turn around and almost immediately cancel the program?
Congressman Valdea, thank you for your question. I think, as the Secretary pointed out last week, the program was set up during a crisis to be a temporary response, and the funding to support it has also been temporary. So it was stood up in emergency when we faced an incredibly uncertain time, a significant spike in hunger, as you noted, and of course the problem of severe food loss and throughout the food system. So we are both assessing the program as well as assessing the current context and what's needed. And the Secretary will determine a plan for the new CFAP funds that leverages, that leverages, that builds in all of the learning, as well as looks to take advantage of the incredibly efficient emergency food bank system. We know that we can do more there to help strengthen them. And we feel that that is probably the right way to transition forward. So the details of his plan aren't yet available, but we will absolutely be briefing members of Congress when they're ready.
No, I appreciate that. And the reason why I asked that question is to go through the process of having a listening session to bring in stakeholders, for a program that potentially was going to be eliminated almost immediately after a listening session. It would have been a prime opportunity to get input from folks on how to fix the program or how to create a program that's more efficient. I mean, I understand there were problems with it, but that was a good opportunity to help resolve some of the problems with the existing program. And I think that should have been the focus of it, especially since that almost immediately it was canceled and that listening session was pretty much a waste for a lot of folks.
Well, if I may, some of the learning that we've gotten from the listening sessions are things that we want to deploy. We've heard a lot about the need for more flexibility, for example, in the TFAP program. We heard about the tremendous value of having a prepackaged box during this kind of emergency. So we're looking to offer something like that in TFAP. Well, we are offering something like that in TFAP right now. So I don't think I really don't want folks to think that we didn't listen and that we aren't seeking to build a way forward with some of the incredible lessons that we heard in those sessions. We took it very seriously and still do.
And so moving forward, I mean, obviously they had a chance to put in their comments during that listening session, but now that they know the program is eliminated, will producers have the opportunity to provide input for the future regarding expansion of existing nutrition assistance programs or creation of a new food distribution program? I mean, will there be an opportunity for producers to have that input on that as well?
Well, I think USDA always is a ready listener to our producer partners. I'm not sure we'll be creating a new program, but again, trying to incorporate a lot of the learning that we got and the input from producers across many sectors. There were some sector-focused listening sessions. I think we're here and ready to meet if folks have thoughts for us.
All right. Well, I appreciate the time. I'm out of time, so I yield back the rest.
Thank you, Mr. Valadeo. At this time, I'm delighted to yield to the chair lady of the Military Construction Veterans Affairs Subcommittee, the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Ms. Schultz, you are now recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership on this important issue. Welcome, Secretary. I just want to go over last week during our hearing with Secretary Vilsack. The Secretary mentioned that the USDA is ending the Farm to Food Box program, which was established by the Trump administration. Flaws in the program's implementation became evident almost immediately. Trump's USDA chose inexperienced distributors, including a catering company and a financial services provider now under investigation, to launch the box program. Food pantries soon began complaining that deliveries weren't arriving, the produce was arriving in poor condition, and the boxes themselves were falling apart. Feeding South Florida, the largest local food bank in my region, told me firsthand how the program led to what they call a commodity cliff, in which they were no longer receiving the necessary foods each week despite an uptick in need. I know that USDA recently announced that it plans to create a new program, which will purchase fresh produce for a produce box program to run through food banks, and that you're also in the process of designing a dairy donation program. Can you provide us any more information on what these new programs will look like and how they differ from the inefficiencies of the previous Trump administration program?
Sure, let me take a crack at that. So first, I think the experience of the Farmers to Family was uneven, and it sounds like in Florida it was less positive than in other places. Looking ahead, we aren't with respect to the Emergency Food Assistance Program, or TFAP, we aren't creating a new program. We've created a new offering so that food banks through our state TFAP agencies can order pre-packaged produce box. We're trying that as an alternative to when we offer just produce as something that they can order in bulk. So this is an example of where we're integrating the learning from the past year into our existing programs. So if that works and it's successful and food banks like it, they like the convenience of the prepackaged box, we'll see if we can continue to do that with available funds. I think the other lesson learned was some of the flexibilities that our food banks enjoyed, not just through Farmers to Families, but also through some of the trade mitigation programs, flexibilities on procurement, and also a focus on the local procurement. These are all things we're trying to integrate into our underlying programs rather than creating something new.
I want to just follow up and say that many argue that boosting SNAP benefits or providing other forms of direct cash assistance for people in need of food might have been far more efficient than the box deliveries. Can you discuss how an increase in SNAP benefits has been helpful to those who might otherwise attend a food distribution site and how the different types of assistance work together?
Yeah, thanks so much for that. That's right. One of the key differences today versus, say, a year ago is we are deploying a much greater extent, shoring up household food purchasing power using SNAP and the pandemic EBT program by putting resources directly into the hands of households so that they can go to the grocery store and buy the food that they need for their families. That we hope, based on the latest census data, is indicating a little bit of a drop in food hardship, and that's a data point, not a trend. But we are that's really been the whole point of shoring up robust household food assistance, is to meet the scale of this crisis with a scaled, robust response. So with that, we hope that the demand at emergency food banks declines, although I'm sure it will take some time, and we can see an easing off there.
Great. And just as my time is winding down, I want to just mention the USDA extended the child nutrition program flexibilities through this summer. But we know that 13 million children live in food insecurity households across the country, and almost 30 million children are enrolled in free or reduced price meals in school. That's probably only going to increase as children return to brick and mortar schools. Can you give us your assurance that school districts will be given enough notice when child nutrition program flexibilities expire or temporary programs end? And will stopgap programs be put in place if needed?
So, Congresswoman, this morning we announced a new set of waivers that would be available for the next school year. 12 waivers that I think taken together will meet what schools and childcare programs need in order to have a successful, strong reopening, be responsive to public health, and provide them with the resources they need. We are planning to go back to normal, as I hope all of us in our broader lives go back to normal operations the following school year. But we will be working with them throughout the coming 18 months for both what they need today and to get ready for that shift back.
Thank you so much. My time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Watson-Schultz. Dr. Harris is back, and at this time, I'm delighted to recognize Dr. Harris, the gentleman from Maryland, for such questions as you may have. You're now recognized, Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Dean, let me just follow up on one question about the so-called work requirements, because my understanding is that it's not only work. It could be training, job training, or it could even be volunteer work. Is that right?
It is, although we don't fund those programs to meet the demand for them.
Right, but volunteer programs, you wouldn't have to fund a volunteer program, right? I mean, it's a volunteer.
That is true, although many organizations don't want to do it because of the insurance and costs associated for them. But yes, you are correct. You can volunteer.
Okay, could you get me information about restrictions, my office information about restrictions on volunteers? So in fact, there aren't volunteer opportunities, because in my communities, I'd like to know if volunteer opportunities are there. And of course, the workforce is in another committee I sit on, the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education Committee. So we'll deal with that in that committee. But just to correct it, we call it work requirement, but it's not really a work requirement. It's a work, volunteer, or training requirement. Now, let me follow up with you a little bit about, because you said nutrition security is very important. So let me talk a little about fresh vegetables versus frozen foods, because the nutrition of them are virtually the same. Frozen foods are more cost effective, less prone to waste than fresh foods. But I've noticed that many nutrition assistance programs seem to have a preference for fresh fruits and vegetables over frozen. Again, even though nutritionally there's very little difference. So is there a preference at your agency for fresh fruits and vegetables over frozen?
No, sir. We go along with the dietary guidelines, and for example, in the WIC cash value voucher program can be spent both on fresh and frozen.
Okay, so that's good to know. But it brings up another question about nutrition. So as a physician, look, I know we have problems with obesity, we have problems with diabetes, we have a problem with things that we think are diet related. And yet the SNAP program restricts very few foods, the eligibility to buy, there are very few restrictions on what you can buy, in very strict contradistinction to the WIC program, which we've already discussed at some length, which actually targets only spending on nutritional foods. Why isn't the department, or I should say, is there any movement within the department to try to say, yeah, maybe we should take those who are receiving SNAP benefits and actually, and the fresh vegetable program, obviously fresh fruits and vegetables goes toward that, but there's more than that. Are there any indications that restricting some of what you can access with SNAP benefits might actually have nutrition security value?
Well, I think what we're prioritizing right now is what I spoke about earlier, and that's ensuring that the program's basic benefit is sufficient to purchase a healthy diet. Many experts, including physicians, say that it's not, and I hesitate to say this to a doctor, but what we hear is it's the right medicine, but the wrong dose. And so I think our first most important step is to make sure that we have a realistic estimate of what the cost of a basic healthy diet is, and that's what we're using, and that's the power we're giving to participants. And so I guess I would just say,
let me just, because I only have about a minute left, but let me concentrate on that, because there are virtually no restrictions on what you can buy with a SNAP benefit except prepared foods. I mean, I understand that. But you can buy things that are very high in starch content, very high in high fructose corn syrup, very high in salt, very high in sugar. You can buy sodas, snack foods, things like that, that I don't know of any physician who says that's the right medicine. Because I think you not only have the wrong dosage, I think you actually have the wrong medicine, because you're unable to do that. And years ago, I joined with Dr. Rowe. We filed a bill to actually just parallel the WIC requirement with the SNAP requirement in terms of what food is available. I think we might be on the verge of a bipartisan bill, filing a bill that would actually ask the department to put those kind of restrictions on. Would they be beneficial nutritionally?
I think adjusting the benefits to the correct level is the best first step. And I think that all of the evidence suggests SNAP participants are buying very much in line with what other Americans are purchasing, and that concerns that you have around diet really need to be addressed for the whole country and not just low-income households.
That's the whole problem. They're buying exactly what Americans are buying. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, I'm delighted to recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Ming. Ms. Ming, you are now recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop, and Deputy Undersecretary Dean. Thank you for being here today. The programs administered by FNS have been real life-saving for my constituents, both before COVID and especially over this last year. My district in Queens, New York, was one of the first impacted by COVID. The impact of this disruption will be felt around dinner tables for long after we are all vaccinated. And I do want to mention that when Secretary Vilsack was here last week, I urged him to support expanding flexibility around SNAP, and particularly to support the elimination of the hot foods exclusion, which are neither automatically more or less healthy than cold food. And the inability to purchase them with SNAP dollars creates unnecessary complications for seniors, homeless, people with disabilities, single parents, college students, and more. Today, I wanted to ask about online SNAP pilots, which I've strongly advocated for, including in a letter from 94 New York elected officials from all levels of government last year, which called in part for the expansion of this program. Many of us across the country benefited significantly from online grocery ordering over the past year. It helped to keep elderly and immunocompromised out of crowded grocery stores. They're not just beneficial from a public health standpoint, but to also help essential workers, seniors, busy parents. And these services have shown to be particularly beneficial to those who participate in the SNAP program. Wanted to ask how FNS is continuing to expand the SNAP program, online purchasing pilot program, and what some of the challenges have been.
Thanks very much for that question. And right now, more than 97% of SNAP households have access to online purchasing across 47 states and DC. But we clearly need to do more because we want to expand the number of stores that are that make this option available. And thankfully, Congress has provided us with 3 separate pots of funds that we're going to be pulling together in a coordinated plan in order to do more with respect to online purchasing, connecting farmers markets to online purchasing, and then some broader oversight and integrity work we need to do within the space on electronic benefits. So as I mentioned earlier in one of the other Q's and A's, that we really want to look to target bringing in small retailers who may not yet have this online purchasing platform for their non-SNAP business. Want to figure out how to bring them in. And we'll be looking to lift up and try to connect farmers markets to this option. So we are pulling together a plan now, and I'm very delighted to come back to the committee when we are a little bit further along in the details to share it with you all.
Thanks. And are there any updates on the implementation of the ARP provisions and when you can expect small farmers, food businesses, farmer markets to have access to online portals and associated technical assistance so they can begin to access SNAP EBT online?
So technical assistance is available now. If farmers markets or retailers approach us, we are ready for that conversation. So I want to make that clear. It'll take us, because the funds will probably be going out through grants and contracts, that takes us a little bit of time as a government entity. So that it could be a while before folks are appreciating the benefits of the funds, but there's no reason for someone not to step forward now, express interest, and get our help.
Great. And just to wanted to ask about the effects of the previous administration's public charge rule. And I know President Biden has rescinded the rule, but wanting to know what FNS is doing to regain the trust of immigrant families so they can continue to benefit. And is there any work being done with nonprofits or translating materials into other languages to get to families who might not be aware of these changes?
Congresswoman, I think the notion of broken trust is very well put. We have a long way to go in terms of restoring trust with immigrant communities on seeking out the benefits that they're eligible for. So let me tick off a couple of quick things. We're meeting very regularly with other agencies, the White House and Department of Homeland Security, to make sure we've got coordinated messaging ready to go. And I've already met with the heads of FRAC, Share Strength, Center on Budget, and Feeding America, on this very topic. It's of deep concern to all of us, and we want to, and we won't just meet with them, but many others. The idea is, how do we get out good, clear, consistent messaging that immigrant and immigrant communities can count on, understand, and then start doing the work of inviting them back to use the programs that are there for them when they need them. So
thank you, Ms. Dean, and thank you, Ms. Ming. At this time, I need to recognize Mr. Molinar, the gentleman from Michigan. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the testimony today. And Ms. Dean, I wanted to talk with you a little bit. In your written statement, you talked about as schools across the country prepare for children to return this fall, we know that school meal operators need flexibilities to allow them to focus on serving high quality, nutritious meals without being overwhelmed by administrative challenges. And you talked about USDA making an announcement soon on flexibilities. I guess my question is, I had a chance to talk with the secretary about flavored 1% milk. And And I come from a state that's strong in dairy, a district that's strong in dairy. And one of our goals is to have children, using more dairy products, and flavored milk has been something that's been popular. I would argue that it's nutritious, but I wanted to hear from you and get a sense for where you see this going, because I think it's really important for our dairy producers to hear directly from you on that.
Well, thank you. And as a U of M grad, glad to get your question from your area. So the school lunch meal standards are based on the dietary guidelines, and which recommend nutrient-dense foods and beverages, and that's where our dairy standards come from. I previously mentioned we did announce a whole slew of waivers for the coming school year. So just so you know about that. But as I mentioned, we're going to be going through the process of updating all of the standards in the school meals program to reflect the dietary guidelines. So that will be an opportunity for us to take a look at and review dairy, and we certainly welcome your input.
Well, I appreciate that, because last week, the secretary said, if you go with the no-fat milk, then kids don't drink it, and you lose the nutritional value and the nutrients that are in milk, the 9 essential vitamins and nutrients and minerals. And he said he was going to encourage the team to take a look at the issue, and doesn't make sense to have a standard that cuts off milk consumption. And he was looking for a standard that encourage milk consumption, and so that we can get the benefits of that. And I'm hoping that there will be. It seems that the waivers that were issued today appear to be somewhat contrary to the secretary's comments about in support of the nutritional value of that milk. And so I'm hoping there can be some clarity, and I would ask for your input on it and your leadership on it. And I think just a clear message would be very important on this.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll be doing our best to communicate out what the waivers mean in the coming days, and I hope you'll find it more responsive than perhaps the initial read suggests.
Okay, thank you very much, and great to see you. Go Blue.
Thanks, go Blue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Molinar. At this time, I will be delighted to represent our frequent speaker pro tem, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure being with you. I want to ask Madam Deputy Undersecretary about colonias. Colonias are on the U.S.-Mexico border. There are hundreds of them. They're rural, unincorporated. And in fact, if you look at some of the numbers, there's about 145 colonias, communities in New Mexico, 114 colonia communities in Arizona, 34 colonia communities in California, and then there's 2,166 colonia communities in the state of Texas, mainly in the southern part of Texas, where we're seeing a lot of people coming in through from Central America. Those areas, they basically don't have water, sewage, but they have persistent poverty levels, which is limited job opportunities and high unemployment, health, poor education. And I asked the Secretary Vilsack a couple of days ago to see if he could get somebody to get back to me, and I'm asking you the same thing, to see what we could do to address those areas, because it covers about approximately 2.5 million individuals on it. And so I'm trying to figure out how the USDA and this committee can help 2.5 million individuals. A lot of it, of course, has to do also with food, whether they get that type of assistance. So I know that Jim Clyburn and other folks had pushed what we call the 10, 20, 30 efforts to make sure that we address the high poverty areas. When I asked my USDA folks down there and the folks down there, they were not even familiar with the 10, 20, 30 program. So my question is, can you help us come up with a strategy to address within your field the 2.5 million individuals in the colonias?
Yes, of course, we'd be happy to discuss that with you. You know, I am familiar, not nearly as much as you, with the colonias around Brownsville, the opportunity to visit some of them, specifically with how the WIC program was doing outreach directly to those communities. So it sounds like there's much more we can do, and delighted to follow up with you and work with you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar. At this time, I'm delighted to represent the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Newhouse, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that very much. And thank you, Undersecretary Dean, for being with us today. Appreciate your testimony. Guess it's an understatement, but we could say that last year was a huge challenge for many of us, and we all learned some lessons from the pandemic. Certainly, it's fair to say that our federal and state, as well as local partners, all came together to ensure that families in need during these uncertain times received much needed supplemental nutrition support. With additional flexibilities and funding, USDA, in my opinion, went above and beyond in order to get resources out the door as fast as possible, including, as we've talked about, school-age children, many of whom are still facing closed schools due to the pandemic. Food and nutrition service obviously was a critical component during this time. But I'm sure for you, there are still lots of challenges and issues ahead. Secretary Dean, the administration announced the end of the Farmers to Families food box program. And certainly there were concerns with the program, but like I said, I think we should also give USDA a lot of credit for standing up a national food program in such a short amount of time and being so responsive. So one question certainly would be, overall, given the circumstances, would you say the program was successful? As I said, my understanding is USDA is currently, and you've mentioned, working on a replacement program. Secretary Vilsack mentioned that last week in his testimony. But from what I've heard, a concern is raised that the replacement program will rely on the TFAP, or the Emergency Food Assistance Program. And I know several states, including my own, Washington, TFAP entitlement funds are usually fully allocated even in non-pandemic years, which could pose a funding problem for both TFAP and the new food box program. So we'll have competing programs. And so if you could respond to that issue, but also TFAP regulations disqualify many nonprofit organizations that previously received and distributed Farmers to Families food boxes. Another concern is that TFAP regulations limit the commodities eligible for purchase. For instance, dairy and meat products, which were previously eligible for the boxes, may or may not be eligible for the new TFAP boxes. So, and to be fair, I was one of the critics of the program. That we had to fight very hard to make sure many of the different specialty crop products were included in these boxes to really represent a diversity in our American agricultural industry. So if you could just respond to some of those things. And again, thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me here and your question. You know, look, I actually want to, there were a lot of, what's the right word to say? There was a mixed experience with the food box program, but it's very important to acknowledge that my colleagues at AMS brought up a program during the middle of an extraordinary crisis in trying to meet the moment that it was in. And I really do salute them for that. And also for the the thousands of nonprofit and charitable groups around the country who stood up to the moment and again helped distribute food to people who needed it. That was just really amazing. That and many other lessons along the way are the kinds of things we want to incorporate into what comes next. And what comes next can both be how we strengthen and improve what we already are doing, as well as deploying some of the remaining resources. So just briefly on the TFAP question, I think it's important I don't think about it just as TFAP, but working with our partners in the Emergency Food Bank Network system, right? TFAP is a funding source. We also do bonus commodities. There's the dairy donation. There was trade mitigation resources. There's a lot of, USDA really tries to find ways to support that system as a whole. TFAP just being one of our tools to do that. So as we look ahead, what can we do to offer some more flexibility, as you're suggesting, in the TFAP space, as well as bring other USDA resources to this incredibly efficient, tremendous partner in the Emergency Food Bank Network? That's where we think is the next best step with respect to this kind of food distribution. So appreciate your thoughts and would welcome your suggestions as we move forward.
Okay, well, we'll certainly be paying attention, and also would welcome that continued back and forth so that we can make it as efficient and as representative of agriculture in this country as possible and get the most help to people that they actually need. So thank you.
Those are shared goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. Thank you, Ms. Dean. I think we have completed the first round, and I will begin a second round. Ms. Dean, the New York Times recently ran a story about the impact of the SNAP increase on families. In the story, when a mother of two in Indianapolis got her 15% SNAP increase, she thought it was a mistake, and she was afraid she'd get in trouble if she spent it. Instead, she skipped meals and used the food bank to get by. It was only when the reporter informed her that she was entitled to the increase that she used the money. This is, of course, very unfortunate, but too common. Can you speak to how the benefit changes are communicated to the recipients and how we can avoid problems like this going forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was a very heartbreaking story of someone struggling so much and afraid to use the help that was offered to her, not trusting in it. So clearly we need to do more. The frontline communicators on a change like that are our state partners. When they make a change, what we call a mass change to benefits, we count on them to communicate to clients what's happening and why. I mean, to be fair, there have been a lot of changes, and I think it can be tough for participants just to keep up with what's going on. But clearly, we need to do better. We want families to use the resources that we're making available to them.
Thank you. Let me ask you about the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program. That program, like the WIC Farmers Market Program, is popular with pretty much everybody, including members of Congress. The committee asked for a report on the backlog on the seniors program, and we received a lot of useful information from USDA. The report said just in 2019, the backlog was $27 million against a program funding level of $20.9 million. The appropriation has not been increased since 2008, and with sequestration, because it's a mandatory program, even that low funding level got cut year after year. States have, in most cases, cut the maximum benefit, and USDA has not been able to increase the funding for individual states based on the performance or to add new participants, such as the Virgin Islands. So can I get your views on that program, please, ma'am?
Well, I think, as you pointed out, it's very popular and for good reason. Connecting participants to farmers markets is powerful both for them and also for producers. So we want to do what we can to strengthen it. I'm going to have to follow up with you on the particular details of that problem, and happy to do that with you or your staff. I'm just not, I'm not well versed in the what is causing that particular dilemma or problem?
Thank you. I've been very pleased to see the growth of the USDA online purchasing program. It's operating in 47 states and District of Columbia. And of course, we hear that it may be made permanent in the next farm bill. But it's particularly important in rural areas, including my district, where we've seen an exodus of grocery stores and the development of food deserts. What are the barriers to participation by smaller grocery stores, and what can we do to incentivize that involvement? Because at this point, it's dominated by large chains, Amazon, Walmart in particular, and I'm interested in getting small and medium-sized grocery stores into the program.
Well, as are we, and they're going to be who we target with the new funds provided to us through the American Rescue Plan. I think one of the biggest issues is whether they are already offering online shopping to their non-SNAP participants, so that what do they have that platform available to them? And then the second issue is, and I'm sure you understand this, we have very rigorous security standards for how our benefits are used. And some small businesses may not may be a little extra step for them to stand up the kinds of requirements that we need. But we are available, we are providing technical assistance, and we want to see if we can offer different solutions to small business.
Thank you very much. My time is almost expired, so at this point I will yield to Mr. Fortenberry, our ranking member. Mr. Fortenberry, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A little bit of cleanup here, Ms. Dean. At several points in our hearing today, the issue of the food box has arisen. My own experience of reviewing it was, again, a program stood up very rapidly to meet emergency food needs that stopped the waste of food and was very much appreciated because it was efficient and effective. I do think you owe an explanation, though, what Mr. Valadeo was pointing out as to the peculiarity as to why a public hearing for input on the effectiveness of the food box program was being held at the same time a parallel effort inside the department to kill the program.
Mr. Fortenberry, I'm not sure I agree with your characterization, but I just do want to be clear, the listening sessions have been incredibly helpful to us as we try to glean what was most impactful, important, what dimensions of the program and some of the flexibilities that USDA deployed there, what would work as we move forward to something new or different, as well as our regular underlying.
How would you characterize the initiative inside the department to stop the program while public hearings were going on for feedback as to the effectiveness of the program? You can characterize it the way you want if you don't like mine.
I think the listening sessions were to help give us good information about what worked and what didn't, both for the purposes of where we go next. And that is not just limited to the food box, the existence or non-existence of the food box program. We at FNS gleaned incredibly useful lessons in those listening sessions that are relevant to any number of our programs.
I'm pointing out the problem of trust. We got one soliciting input and feedback on the effectiveness of the program, and clearly some other initiative, maybe it's outside your domain, going on that would stop the program. Number two, we've all agreed that the rapid expansion of SNAP during the duress of the emergency of the pandemic was necessary. At its core, though, SNAP is a transitional program. Do we still accept that premise? I think this is very important because accepting persons with limited capacity or other inabilities to find meaningful employment. The traditional amount of time that a person has remained on SNAP has been 9 months. Now, again, that's pre-COVID in an older statistic. Are we still accepting the premise that this is a transitional program to meet nutritional needs in the midst of an emergency so that we can assist a person as they transition to meaningful work?
I think for some participants, and in fact, the majority, the program is a temporary program. They use it when they lose their job or their hours go down, and then when their wages go back and rebound, they don't need it anymore and don't use it. But there are some participants, low-income elderly, for example, their Social Security benefit that they start receiving, say at 65, if it qualifies them for SNAP, we don't expect that their income will change for the rest of their life. And so they may be very long-term participants or individuals with disabilities.
Yes, that's why I pointed that out earlier, accepting persons in those circumstances. The other problem that we have to wrestle with is, frankly, there are a lot of people who are working and trying to string together enough means to stay afloat while who are also eligible for SNAP. God bless them. The idea of trying to, again, raise wages and raise opportunities in societies is a significant one. But again, our programmatic intentionality is the premise of it, at least in the beginning, was accepting for those who have some capacity limitations because of either age or sickness or again, other types of incapacities to be able to seek meaningful employment, is that this is a transition. So as we look at, expanding opportunity or changing the nature of the program, I think we have to hold in balance that initial idea, because ultimately what's for a person's well-being, to be able to provide for themselves and be a participant in the community through, again, finding that type of opportunity that's consistent with their needs and talents. Third is, can you give me the top 3 corporate retailers who redeem SNAP benefits?
I can easily get back to you on that. I don't want to get them wrong, but so why don't I just follow up?
Well, I think this is important because as we're seeing more and more conglomerate corporate control of our economy, there is an incumbent responsibility on these major retailers to actually participate with us in pursuing the types of nutritional outcomes, the selection, if you will, so that supply is actually there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. At this time, I'd like to recognize Dr. Harris if you have an additional question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And let me just, again, following up on what Mr. Fortenberry is, brought up, that, I'm a little concerned that the SNAP program is not also being utilized to do the nutritional education and provide nutritional foods. And, I get it. There are a lot of big corporate interests that wanted to include sodas and snack foods and things like that. But, the purpose of that program should focus on nutrition. But let me talk just very briefly, ask about the electronic data matching for SNAP eligibility, because I'm told the improper payment rate is somewhere between 6 and 7%. Clearly, when you're dealing with tens of billions of dollars, that's real money. And I know in FY 2020, we provided the Food and Nutrition Service funding to begin evaluating the verification process of earned income for SNAP applicants using electronic data matching. First of all, can you speak to the value of using electronic data matching, both in terms of ensuring eligibility as well as reducing administrative costs, and perhaps a status update on the progress of the agency's evaluation and whether or not the pilot program has begun?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. So the more that we can use electronic verification of income or other core pieces of information to determine eligibility, the more accurate we can be. And of course, the easier it is for clients. They don't have to go and find all these disparate pieces of information and turn them in. So that's really important. I fully support it. And I believe the grants project that you're mentioning, we announced in March the availability of the grants. And so we'll be waiting for those applications and are, like you, eagerly looking forward to what states come forward with so that we can learn and continue to improve.
Do you believe that this electronic matching might be able to lower the improper payment rates?
Yes. Yes, that's the goal.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harris. Mr. Valadeo, you are now recognized for additional questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In light of the sudden cancellation of the Family Farmers to Food program, I'm incredibly concerned that not only the U.S. producers who are providing nutritious food options for the boxes, but also the people in need who are receiving food boxes. It is critical that people who are facing food insecurity have adequate access to healthy food options. Understanding there is a chance USDA does not reinstate the food box program, there are still many individuals across the U.S. who are lacking accessible, healthy food options. In your testimony, you mentioned you are working to reevaluate thrifty food plan to ensure it reflects the true cost of basic healthy diet. Please expand on what specific actions you are taking as you reevaluate the thrifty food plan.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So the 2018 Farm Bill actually directs us to do that and sets forth several criteria. So one is to make sure that they reflect the most recent dietary guidelines. That to also take we are supposed to reevaluate with respect to the dietary guidelines, current consumer prices for food, and I think consumer purchasing patterns. So we'll be doing all of that, and we're holding several stakeholder meetings. We're talking with experts to see what other dimensions and factors we should look at, and hoping to publish a reevaluation in good time, so for everyone to take a look at. I hope that was clear. Sorry.
Well, I appreciate that. And this is obviously a very important topic to me. I represent a particularly low and rural and low income district. I just hope that I'd like you to commit to us here that you'll keep us apprised of as you move forward in the evaluation process.
Very happy to do that.
Thank you. And then change topics a little bit. Ms. Dean, this morning, if the Food and Nutrition Service, FNS, made an announcement regarding the school meal flexibilities. Will the USDA follow through on the Secretary's comments and enacted December 2020 provision to allow low-fat flavored milk in schools, particularly during the school year 21-22 procurement period, as well as more generally work with schools and their suppliers on a more reasonable approach to the sodium reduction targets?
So with respect to the waivers that were offered today on dairy, the states have the ability to offer waivers to districts if the districts can demonstrate a need for a relaxation of the dairy standard that you mentioned related to the circumstances. So that will be available to them. And then I did mention earlier that we are going to be taking a look at the nutrition standards with respect to the most recent dietary guidelines. So that's an opportunity for us to update the standards, but also assess the timelines under the current regulations that schools are expected to hit those standards. We've had some disruption in rolling out the standards because of legislative and litigation holds, I guess, on the rollout. So it's a good moment for us to assess the timeline.
So you mentioned that the school districts have the ability to apply based on a need. Who do they have to apply with the state, and who do they justify that need to? Does the state have to justify it to the federal government, or does the school have to do it to the state?
I believe the way the waivers will work is the states elect to take the waiver, and then they work with the districts in their state.
So the federal government plays no role in deciding if there's a need for a waiver.
Well, we set the terms and conditions. We're actually going to be doing for congressional staff a bigger briefing this afternoon, so maybe that's a good opportunity for us to get into the details with you.
Appreciate that. Can we count on you to ensure the USDA follows through on allowing low-fat flavored milk in schools? I know it was brought up earlier, but it's an important topic for a lot of us, particularly during the school year 21-22 procurement period, as well as more generally work with schools and their suppliers on a more reasonable approach to sodium reduction targets. Hopefully the briefing will address that a little bit as well.
Well, as I said, waivers will be available on dairy for the coming school year if they're needed by a district, if they're not able to meet the standards. And beyond that, we'll be taking a look at the standards to reflect the new guidelines and the timeline. So again, happy to talk with you more about that.
All right, and I do appreciate the fact that the release was sent to us this time versus a news article that we read on the morning of the hearing. I mean, still, the announcement being on the day of the hearing doesn't give us the proper amount of time to prepare for these types of questions, but at least appreciate the fact that you guys reached out to us versus the press first. So thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Valadeo. I believe we have come to the end of round two. I have one additional question, and I, of course, will yield to Mr. Fortenberry for any that he might have when I conclude. My question is regarding the Pandemic Electronic Benefit Transfer Program. As you know, the 2021 school year, the USDA approved more than $14.1 billion in pandemic EBT benefits to 16.8 million children in 34 states and territories, which leaves a lot of states, including my state of Georgia, that are not participating. 2 weeks ago, there was an alarming article in Politico about the issues that are plaguing that program. PBET is a great program because it can reach families that may not qualify for SNAP benefits, and it can ensure that children are eating meals that they would have otherwise eaten at school. We need to make sure this program is working. What are the biggest bureaucratic hurdles that are slowing the disbursement of the money? What is USDA doing to help states overcome these hurdles? The Politico article noted that Secretary Vilsack has been calling governors and states that haven't submitted the PBET plans to USDA. And can you tell us what you're hearing from the states? And do you think that the remaining states and territories will in fact submit distribution plans? And if so, when are they expected? And will some states not be approved for the 2021 school year, which is fast dissipating?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So today we're at 35 states are approved for over 20 million children, but that's not enough. We need all states and territories in with an approved plan because, as you point out, this is an absolutely critical benefit to put resources into the hands of parents to help feed their children. You know, you asked me about the bureaucratic hurdle. I would say really the issue here is that the law appropriately requires that PEBT be targeted to children who are not attending school because of a school closure. And so when we work with states, we say to them, you need to develop a statewide list or some mechanism to match children who are eligible for free and reduced price meals to a school and to that school's schedule. And the reality is that many states just simply don't have or collect that information. They just don't know school schedules at a statewide level. So it's been a real challenge for them, but we have to ask them to meet the requirements of the law. We are doing everything we can to offer technical assistance, to provide flexibility, to allow them to make simplifying assumptions, but we do need them to hit the standard of the law. And we are leaning in, and just last week had a conversation with Georgia. Our goal is to make this happen in all states and territories.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dean. Let me now yield to Mr. Fortenberry if you have any additional questions.
Only this one as regarding my last question. Ms. Dean, if you could get back to us regarding the top 3 retailers in the country for SNAP redemptions, I think that would be very helpful because what I'm projecting here, again, is the idea of corporate responsibility. We are living in an era where there is more and more concentration in this type of retail, as well as in many other places. So to call upon those corporate giants who are greatly benefiting from government expenditures to maybe play some constructive role in terms of supply of the nutritious food as we begin to integrate these important shifts in our own public policy, I think would be very important and beneficial. I'd like your response to that, please.
Yes, I'm happy to follow up with you with that list.
Okay, but about the idea that I'm projecting.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I didn't realize that was a bigger question. Yes, of course. I think our and I will say our retail partners are critical in the work that we do with the program. They are interacting with our participants each and every day, and have a lot to say about the shopping patterns, the needs and interests of participants. And so, if we were to pursue a conversation about how best to address their nutritional needs through their stores, I think they would very, very much welcome the opportunity to have that conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fortenberry. And let me take this opportunity, Ms. Dean, Deputy Undersecretary Dean, to thank you for your testimony today. We all understand how incredibly busy you are, and we thank you for your time and your patience this morning. The Food, Nutrition, and Consumer Services has an enormous responsibility. It's made even greater by the pandemic for administering the nation's nutrition assistance programs, and it's vital that these programs are working efficiently and that they're reaching all eligible persons and households that are in need. I appreciate your hard work and the work of your entire staff to ensure that the most vulnerable among us do have access to food and a healthy, nutritious diet. Along with what we've discussed, we will also forward additional questions for the record, and we will appreciate your diligence in getting your responses to us in a timely manner. Mr. Fortenberry, would you like to have any closing remarks?
No, other than again to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership. I think it's been a productive hearing to unpack this significant portion of America's public policy, both expenditures, but also impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry, and let me thank all of the members in attendance and for the staff who put this hearing together. With that, this subcommittee meeting is now adjourned.